Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Ms. Watson, to members of the Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for convening this hearing here in Memphis, Tennessee. I see representatives of other elected officials. Thank you all. I'm start naming folks. I'll never get into my few comments. It is refreshing to know that in this time and day of always speaking of recessions and economics matters, we tend to forget that there's something just as important. While economics and finance are important, human rights perhaps, is the most important thing, because you can have all the riches in the world if the basic rights are not respected of all human beings, then we have not gained anything. I came in on the tail end of the last testimony with respect to police harassment. Whenever I hear that, I want to hear it directly. I know we had one incident in which there was some taping, and right after that, we issued went to have one of my representatives to. I usually can speak loudly enough without this, and can you hear me back there? Let me just quit, because this is going to restrict me. I spent too much time in a courtroom to stand in one place, and so that gets in my way. I just keep my voice up. I always say when you raise 6 boys, Pastor White, you're used to hollering anyway. So I feel right at home when I holler at you on the back row there. So I'll keep my voice up. And this is picking it up. Is that all right? Great. We issued a policy statement right after that there'll be no harassment. You can film and tape anything that we're doing. So any kind of harassment, I want to hear about it personally, because there's just no excuse for that whatsoever. Pastor White and I have discussed numerous times, and this is not what I'm supposed to talk about, but that's never kept me from rambling around. About the fact that the Civilian Review Committee, if we're going to have one, we got to have one. I don't believe in just having an entity that has no subpoena power, can't make anything do, and this is why I have not sought to just bring that back, because it's just illusory. It doesn't really, they can't compel anything. So if we're going to do that, it ought to be the real thing. Now, let me get back to what I'm supposed to say, because I only have about 10 minutes. And she's applauding because you don't want to hear what we're saying?
No, what you just got through saying.
Thank you, son. Now, let me say this. We are particularly sensitive to the very diverse situations in which our police officers are working these days. It requires totally different training. The old go to the academy and learn how to fire your pistol, learn how to use your gas, and learn how to put the cuffs on. Those days are gone. And this is why we have 4 officers working with the LGBT community. As a matter of fact, I met yesterday with a representative of the LGBT community, just to make certain that our training is up to par, that we are very sensitive in all of our interactions with that community, and we're going to be doing more in that connection. But let me get back to immigration integration, and I have a copy of this which I will leave with the commission, and I will try to leave enough time. Do you do questions? All right. I'll try to leave just a few minutes. Again, thanks for coming to Memphis and here at this beautiful school for a topic that is very dear to me and of quite pertinence to our city. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about promoting mutual benefits for immigrants and how that benefits not merely them but the community as a whole. The perspective from which I view immigrants in our community and this has everything, this shapes the way you look at it. Some say, what are we going to do with them? My question is, what can they do for us?
That's right.
They enrich our community. Just rephrasing the question shifts it from seeing them as a liability to seeing them. You hear the tone there? Them. What are we going to do with them? When you just shift it to say, now, what can they do for our community? not a liability, but an asset. And that's the perspective from which we approach it. First of all, at the local level, there's nothing in the city charter about immigration. I don't do immigration. If you're here, you're here. Now, if somebody else wants to come and harass you and whatever, but I have no authority when it comes to immigration, nor do our police officers. We have our hands full as it is, so we are not into the immigration business, particularly in the case of victims. We know that there are so many individuals who are reluctant to report offenses against themselves because of the fact that, quote, my papers aren't in order, close quote. That is not our business. Now, we can't tell you what the feds will do, but we're not going to get into, well, how did you get here? If you've been robbed, you've been robbed. It doesn't matter where you came across the border or what you had, what kind of papers you had. You've been robbed, and it occurred in the city of Memphis, and it's against the laws, and we're going to deal with it. And that's the case all throughout the judicial process as far as the Memphis Police Department is concerned. Back in the spring of 2013, I, along with mayors from 20 other cities, was invited by then New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg to attend an immigration integration conference he had organized in New York City. We were invited due to our rapidly growing foreign-born population. Yes, believe it or not, Memphis was included in this short list of cities. We do have one of the fastest growing immigrant populations. Tennessee, particularly Middle Tennessee, as y'all know, over there. As a matter of fact, during the elections, was it in Iraq or where they had the elections? Nashville was an election, it was a polling site. Some of the Kurdish community, because there were so many in the Middle Tennessee area. And once a year, we actually do out, I can't think of the name of the school, we have folks from the Mexican consulate to come to town and to just make sure that those from Mexico who are living here, any problems they're having, driver's license or whatever, they have an opportunity to deal with it. Tennessee is listed as a destination state because it is the third fastest growing immigration population in the nation during the first decade of the 21st century. The third fastest growing immigrant population is in the state of Tennessee. So this is not just some kind of hobby that you get to when you run out of everything else to talk about. The measure used to chart immigrant integration success is described as economic mobility and civic engagement by and the receiving community's openness to the immigrant population. And this is what we in the city of Memphis use as our compass in guiding our activities. While immigration is often viewed as a federal issue, we all know, as the great Tip O'Neill put it, all politics is local. So while the folks in Washington work on immigration reform and tackling the best ways to deal with the current system, we've always worked to ensure that those who are residents, and notice I did not say citizens. I hope they all do become citizens. But if you're here, you're here. And I did not say citizens, and it wasn't an oversight, but residents of our city to know that they don't have to live in fear. As a matter of fact, roughly a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had a police officer, I can say who did this because he pled guilty, so it's not accused of shaking down members of the immigrant community. We dealt with that. He was terminated and prosecuted, but I went beyond that. I immediately, within a matter of days, got individuals from the Latino Hispanic community together and said, I want the word to go out that this will not be tolerated, and nobody in this city has to fear reporting a police officer or anybody for that matter. The point I make is it's not enough to simply say, okay, we will follow the law. There has to be a sense of what we call intentionality. You've heard of affirmative action in racial matters. You have to go on the affirmative and go beyond, we will follow the law. And this is what we do. I'm glad Ms. Nika Jackson from my office this year, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. One process we have put in place here locally includes the Mayor's Multicultural Coalition. This is a group comprised of approximately 30 leaders representing diverse populations and organizations that serve multicultural residents and immigrants. This group meets to hear, and we like to hear early on, not after things actually explode, about programs and policies coming from my administration, but they also have an opportunity to tell me very candidly how the work we are doing and plan to do impacts their specific populations. I want to hear the bad and the good. Irish Mercado, is Irish here? She's not here? Okay, from Tennessee Immigrant Rights. Nika, blame Nika. She said you weren't here. Great to see you. You're familiar with what we're working on. You're a new member of our group. Thank you so much for joining up to work with us. Experiences and actions we take for granted when we plan or implement programs and policies can become major barriers for the immigrant population. Let me give you an example. And this is, you might say that's kind of small, but it really typifies what goes on in our community. During the holidays, we gave away 5,000 Christmas baskets to folks who, through no fault of their own, had fallen on tough times. Now, the standard process said, if you want one of these baskets, and actually what basket minimizes, these were huge boxes. I mean, they were stocked with everything. The process was you have to come downtown to a central location to pick up the baskets. Well, we knew, because of our work with the Multicultural Coalition, that some of the Latino pastors had said, look, our community, there are folks in our community do not feel safe coming downtown. They really need the food, but they feel that it's a setup. That we're down there near the federal building, and this is a setup. Now, is that legit or not? That doesn't matter. When you're mayor of a city, perception rules the day. Right. Perception becomes reality. So we simply said, wait a minute, we know there's a need there. So I said, we'll just have to change the process. When we were soliciting, we said we were going to make sure everybody who's hungry is taken care of. I could have just said, let's just stick to it, the rules are the rules. We said no. We went back to the leaders in those communities and had them to pick up the baskets and pass them out back at churches in their neighborhoods. I use that as an example to point out that it's not enough, again, just to say we're going to treat everybody fairly. It's affirmative because of those fears, whether they're well-grounded or not. Also, our local Muslim and African community expressed concerns regarding interaction with the police department and the economic stability of their businesses. So what we did is we had town halls for the larger Muslim community and roundtables for African business owners. Immigrant business owners had an opportunity to sit down and meet with the top level brass from our police department representing precincts where their businesses are located. They want to work with the police and help serve as eyes and ears around their stores and gas stations. We have to be really careful about this. A lot of cities have exploded because there's this tension between the indigenous folks who live in a neighborhood, African American, and then they see someone Muslim is operating a store. That's caused a lot of tension. So we don't allow that to explode. We go in and root it out and get folks to talk about it. I have the top brass from the police department to come to my office, and I have the people who have these concerns to sit right around the table. Some said, well, no, bring them in secretly and then bring the police officer. And I said, no, that's fake, that's fictitious. They got to live together. If you're big enough to have a complaint, hey, get it out here. And I've got my officer sitting right there, right across the table, so that the residents can look them right in the face and say, your officer came in my store and did this. Your officer did this. And so much of this is based on cultural misunderstandings. Let me give you a perfect example. Anybody ever heard of the word cat, K-A-T-T? Anybody? Well, just as Ms. Wurzburg has a a cup of Starbucks there. I don't touch that stuff. So I just couldn't get there this morning. I'm there every morning, early. Just as she got, that's legal. Well, in certain societies, cat, K-A-T-T, you chew it. Some people in America chew tobacco. That's legal. Well, it turns out that cat is a controlled substance under the American Drug Code, under the United States Drug Code. So the individuals who are chewing cat, and they're getting arrested having their money chosen, because to them it was not illegal in their country. Just as that's not illegal, chewing tobacco is not illegal, they were chewing cat. And it was causing so much tension. So I got all of them in one room, and they started explaining what cat is, and I had to immediately have the officer show them, yeah, but I've forgotten what schedule it is under the United States Drug Code. It is a drug. So we're trying to work through that. It's very touchy, but we are talking about it. They felt they were being harassed because the officers were doing something that we consider just like, I don't chew tobacco, or Starbucks, or whatever. So those are the kinds of things that come out once you get everybody together. The other thing, officers do have the right to go into your store and make sure that those who are selling alcohol have the particular license and all. Now, is the officer permitted to take his flashlight and go around behind the counter and start searching? No, not unless there's some other probable cause. Some of the officers were doing that, but we all sat in one room and we made it clear. You can go in, you can look, you can ask to see if, do you have your card, do you have your license, you can shine the flashlight up there if you want to, but you can't go in and just conduct a search of the whole business because you're looking at it. Those were causing tensions about to explode in our community. Fortunately, we had the process in place. One other thing, out on Winchester, some of the West African communities, if you want to get your hair braided, that is the place to do it. Well, in Tennessee, you have to have a license to do that. They said, wait a minute, you're harassing us because we're not putting chemicals on there. We're not using any heat or anything. Well, under the cosmetology rules of the state of Tennessee, you're in business, you got to be licensed. So again, that was causing a lot of tension, but because we have a process in place, it did not explode into fights with police officers because we're working through it. We had a state representative to come in. He said, I'll introduce a bill so that you are exempted. So those are the kinds of things that you can do when you show that you are receptive to every person who is a resident of your city. As a result of these things, we were chosen to become what is known as a welcoming America city. There are cities, as a matter of fact, the fellow who was one of the founders, I cannot think, what's his name?
David LaBelle.
David LaBelle is one of the leaders in that, based down in Atlanta. So we're becoming a welcoming city, a welcoming America city. We're proud of that. Basically, we're saying you are welcome in this city. So we'll join up with Atlanta, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, and of course, New York. The bottom line is that as our city changes, we have to change our way of thinking, change our policies. We have to move away from this is the way we always have done it, one size fits all. The cities who take that attitude are going to be the cities that will continue to progress, and we want to be among those cities. We're going to do every kind of outreach we can. This is required. A monthly radio show on Spanish radio. The city of Memphis hosts that show. It's designed to educate the community on city ordinances and to raise awareness about various city assets. All of our libraries host events and activities focusing on diversity. We host naturalization ceremonies. We have a language line, which is an interpretation center over the phone. So if someone calls in about a pothole, there's a language barrier. We can speak in any language and make sure that the complaint is received and processed. So again, Memphis, I think, has to have a chip on its shoulder. We are held out, unfortunately, as a place where Dr. King died. The world has not forgotten that. But I always say that sometimes a sordid past can become the compost pile for the most beautiful roads. Have you ever seen a beautiful compost pile? There's no such thing as a beautiful compost pile. I don't care what you say. It's rotten, it's deteriorating, sometimes it has a little odor. But I tell you what, it's out of that ugly compost pile that the brightest rose springs in the summertime. So we take our horrible past, we do not deny it. We have a chip on our shoulder about that. And consequently, we have to do more to live it down. And that's with respect, not merely black and white, but everybody who is a resident of this city. Thanks for allowing me to come by. I appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, from the beginning of this country, it has been documented that the immigrant who comes in is not a forever taker on society, that it has been documented over and over again that it takes less than 6 or 7 years for an immigrant to be a giver to the community. And this is what I think we've got to say over and over to our longtime citizens who think they didn't come from an immigrant somewhere.
Not a liability, but assets. That undergirds everything that we do. Thank you all very much, Ms. Watts. Thank you very much.